to you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Valli. I work for WWF India. I work from the Bangalore office. I'll keep my video off for better connectivity on the internet. Well, today's talk is about Where Have Asia's Vultures Gone by Chris. Of course, a person who has been working on the endangered bird species for 30 plus years does not need an introduction. However, it gives a great pleasure to talk and read a few lines about him. Chris' full name is Christopher G.R. Bowden. He is Globally Threatened Species Officer for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which in short is RSPB, and has worked on northern bald ibis since 1994 and was based in Agadir, Morocco for a total of 7 years working on that species. He is coordinator of the African Eurasian Waterbirds Agreement International Working Group for Northern Bald Ibis and chair of the International Advisory Group for Northern Bald Ibis between 1999 and 2016. Since 2004, his primary role has been coordinating the Asian Vulture program in South Asia. He is currently program manager for SAVE, which stands for Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, a consortium of regional and international organizations committed to the conservation of vultures in South Asia. Chris is also the co-chair of the IUCN Vulture Specialist Group since its formation in 2011. His experience over the past 30 plus years is mainly with critically endangered bird species, being field-based in Africa, Asia, UK, and the Caribbean. Earlier on, breeding ecology work was mainly on woodlark, nightjar, stone curlew in the UK, both as a research ecologist, but mainly as a coordinator in recent years. Also including 1 year living on Montserrat for Montserrat Oriole and 4 years in a village in southwest Cameroon. Chris is currently based in Bangalore, and we are very proud of that, like we are very proud of many other conservationists who are working in Bangalore. He regularly visits UK for his RSPB work. Thank you for all the participants who have joined today's call. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Valli, and it's really great to be here and doing this lecture to you all. So I think without any further ado, I will make a start, and I have to issue warnings like this that to anyone who meets me all the time, having worked on vultures since 2004 full time, but I want to give this talk, and it will be primarily about the vultures of Asia and of India, but I'd like to start by putting that in the context of vultures globally. So there are 23 species of vultures, or vultures and condors.
Sorry, Chris, can you make your screen full screen, please?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Vultures and condors, sorry, yes. 7 of the vulture species in the world are found in the New World, that's the Americas, but taxonomically they are really completely different. They're an example of co-evolution. They're very, very distantly related to the vultures we have here in the Old World. And in fact, there's some other interesting differences about New World vultures. New World vultures locate their prey mainly or primarily through the sense of smell, whereas, because they've got very good sense of smell, whereas Old World vultures don't have that. They, the vultures here detect their food very much based on eyesight by spotting from afar. So one sort of major difference. So but just before I leave the, because I'm not going to say much more about the American vultures, but two of them are the condors. The California condor is critically endangered and the subject of a big program. The Andean condor is the spectacular one that we often see in South American and Andes movies. But vultures in the Americas are much less threatened generally, apart from the California condor, than the vultures in the old world where we are. So here's another view of all the world's vultures lined up in rows, and you can see, I mean, there's obviously a reasonable size range, but they are the one feature which prompted the IUCN to ask me to help form a vulture specialist group a few years ago now, back in 2010-11, was because of the 23 species, over half of them are now red data book species. And that is just an extraordinary proportion of vultures are in deep, deep trouble. And I know Nikhil would like me to make this talk quite light and full of anecdotes, but unfortunately it will be dominated by some of the problems faced by vultures. And 3 years ago, there was a big exercise to actually review by the Convention of Migratory Species and the Raptors MOU within that, to review the status and threats to all of the vultures in the old world. And that review came up with this really important summary of the threats to vultures across the old world. And actually, the details on this are quite surprisingly different between the different continents. In fact, the biggest crisis for vultures came here in South Asia first, but more recently, African vultures are suffering very, very serious declines too. But the threats to vultures in Africa are actually primarily poison baits, and people in many cases deliberately poisoning vultures, either because vultures are showing where the poachers have killed an elephant or other large game, rhinos, and so they're deliberately killing the vultures to stop them alerting, because the security forces were actually using vultures to find the poachers. But in fact, probably the most predominant threat we're finding even more recently than that is something we call belief-based use, which, and I use that term very selectively, and I try to avoid the term traditional medicine, because we don't believe there are any true medicinal value of vulture parts. But unfortunately, these belief-based use reasons are another reason why a lot of vultures are being targeted. And in fact, there was a very recent horrendous incident just 3 months back now, in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa, where more than 2,000 hooded vultures, a critically threatened species, were deliberately poisoned for people wanting them for belief-based use reasons. So African vultures have got some different problems. There is food shortage there, and in Europe and parts of Asia, and food shortage is certainly a problem. But here in South Asia, I'll be talking a lot more about a very special problem that we have here, which is coming elsewhere as well. And so moving then to South Asia and to India specifically, I wanted to just quickly run through so of the 23 species worldwide, we have 9 species in Asia, or 10 if you count the small lappet-faced vulture population in Arabia, but 9 in the rest of Asia, and all of those 9 are found here in India. And you can see there a summary of the population estimates for those 9 species. And the one at the top, white-rumped vulture, oriental white-backed vulture, whichever you want to call it, the population of that just 20 to 25 years ago was thought to be the most abundant large raptor in the world. And so population in the tens of millions. And you can see that world population estimate there is now 8,600 individuals, of which 6,000 are here in India. So really important, but that has declined more than any other species. It's actually 99.9% decline. So unbelievable how quickly that's happened, all since the early 1990s. Other ones which are, I'll pick out, I'm not going to talk in detail about all of these, but there are 3 endemic gyps vultures, and gyps vultures are the griffon vulture family, and the top 3 are all critically endangered. Long-billed vulture is doing slightly better than white-rumped vulture. Slender-billed vulture, however, stands out as being probably the rarest vulture in the world now. So, and predominantly found in Assam and northeast India, but a very small population, scattered population across the Terai of northern India, southern Nepal, and the other direction across to as far as Cambodia. So that species is of special concern to us. Red-headed vulture is another nice one. Egyptian vulture has been uplisted as well to endangered, not critically endangered yet. It's got a very wide distribution, but that and there's the endemic subspecies to the subcontinent of Egyptian vulture. So very, very, very important one. Himalayan griffon is doing a lot better, obviously higher up in the in the mountains, and the others below. And I just wanted to pick out Eurasian griffon at the bottom there. There's a population of Eurasian griffon. It isn't thought to or confirmed to breed in India, but they come from further north and winter in India, and the numbers are probably decreasing. But the subspecies involved is quite limited area, and I think watch this one, because it may actually be decided that it's a full species in future. So an interesting one. I'm not going to dwell on the identification, and there's some lovely illustrations in Rishad Naroji's book here, and there's some bearded Cinereus and Egyptian there, but I just want to really highlight what a headache actually some of the identification is. And so the adults and the first years of each of the gyps vultures are relatively easy to identify, at least if you get a reasonable view. But the second, third, fourth, fifth year, third, fourth year immature birds, the transition plumages of these species are really confusing. And I think there's a job to be done to actually fully document the different plumages of each of the ages to make that easier. And that does complicate some of the counts of vultures, because they're not that easy. So moving on a bit on, so here in India, of course, the Jatayu story makes vultures of particularly special cultural importance, as well as just another species of bird, which and that's something which ought to be very helpful for their conservation. But there are other cultural significances of the birds, of vultures here. The sky burial, I mean, the birds actually being consuming dead people. The Parsis, Parsi communities and their towers of silence, and the top right there is one community. But up in the Himalayas, the Himalayan griffins dispose of many of the hill communities, and that is very much ongoing as a practice. But culturally, they just have been very much part of life and the cleaning service that vultures offer. And these classic photos of Gautam Narayan from Delhi in the 1980s, I show these in every talk that I give, because I just think it is so amazing, really, to see how many vultures there were. And those are all vultures on the tops of those buildings and covering the carcass dumps. There were in the tens of thousands just in that area. And these slides just illustrate the extraordinary densities. Okay, an artificially high density because of cattle carcass disposal practices here, but nevertheless, really extraordinary. And we should really highlight the role vultures play in the ecosystem, and the fact that 10 million tons of rotting meat was disposed of by vultures 20 years ago. And now, with the declines that we're all, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, something else is happening to that rotting meat. And one of the things that's happening is that feral dogs are benefiting and getting more share of that rotting meat. And feral dogs have increased, or in the early 2000s, there was good data that feral dogs did increase by up to 30% in several large parts of India. And of course, feral dogs are the main transmitter of rabies. So there's a very real knock-on effect of a human health hazard indirectly of not having the vultures. And so getting data on the population trends has been something which thankfully BNHS and Vibhu Prakash had done some raptor counts in 1992, and they'd counted vultures as well as the other raptors, and that gave us a benchmark for the repeating those counts, and so that method has been repeated and was due to be repeated again this year. Unfortunately, with COVID, we weren't able to do that. So it'll be another year before we get the next dot on this graph. But note that this is a log scale graph. So any kind of decline on a log scale is a decline towards extinction. So, but the population has been stabilizing, but I'll come back to that. But these road transects are very much the one really repeatable method that can be used. Vultures are actually extremely difficult to count because they're so mobile, and even if you count their nests, you know, they can shift the colony, and do you know whether you've really really counted different birds or the same ones? It's a big headache and something we might want to come back to in the questions. So I showed you the slide at the beginning, but unfortunately, although I talk about vultures all the time, I end up talking about diclofenac all the time because, as I hope you're all aware, the main cause of the dramatic declines in the 1990s has been absolutely clearly established to be veterinary diclofenac, a painkiller, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, NSAID, NSAID, as a term I'll be using again. And that drug is relatively safe for the cattle. It's relatively safe for humans as a drug, but it is absolutely lethal to vultures. Unfortunately, they got such good digestive system and so well adapted in so many ways, but they've got a weakness in their system that means that an injected cow, a cow that's been treated with diclofenac within the last 2-3 days, if it dies and the vulture eats the dead cow, it will be highly toxic to the vulture that eats it, and it will kill it of kidney failure. And actually, in dead vultures that have consumed cattle or any ungulate which has been treated with diclofenac, the common symptom we've now found is that they have gout. And gout, you can see in the middle there, is uric acid crystals that's on the liver and intestines. The deposits of that actually cause kidney failure in the vulture, and it's kidney failure that actually kills the bird. And this correlation back in 2002, 2003, when we had no idea what had killed them, thankfully a team in Pakistan led by Lindsay Oakes did the detective work, and they discovered that diclofenac was indeed what was killing the vultures there. And then the teams here in India and Nepal were able to repeat or to look at their samples again, and found that yes, diclofenac was in the tissues, and even examples which hadn't been fully analysed had got gout, but anyone that had got gout, any bird that had got gout and was then tested was found to have diclofenac in the tissues, and any bird that was found not to have gout had died of something else because it didn't have diclofenac in the tissues. So this correlation back then, there has been a considerable amount of data since then, and unfortunately we still get birds dying of diclofenac poisoning even today, despite what's been happening. But let's not jump the gun. Let's go through the story of what happened. And back in 2004, which is when I was brought in to help try and coordinate what was needed to save vultures from extinction, there were the job description was, number one, remove diclofenac from the environment, from veterinary use, and number two was get a breeding program up and running. But going back to number one, to remove diclofenac, it was clear that we had to have a safe alternative drug that we could recommend to the vets, and for the breeding program, it was obviously very important to get on with getting birds into the system. So we set about doing that. RSPB and BNHS were at the forefront of this in India. Research colleagues of mine, but Vibhu Prakash very much central to what's happened. And we took those the publications and did a lot more work, and thankfully managed to identify a safe alternative quite quickly. Meloxicam, there's a whole story attached to finding that, but I won't go through that in detail now. But then having got that sorted out, we made films. Mike Pandey made films. We got press coverage, but we had to convince the government, and Nita Shah was involved at that stage in working in Delhi to get the government. But as well as the government, we also needed to get the conservation community fully conversant with what was happening, because and actually I remember going to a meeting in Gujarat, that one at the bottom there. There were 24 talks all about vulture declines, and everyone agreed that they'd declined. But even 6 months after the publication, people weren't really convinced that diclofenac was the main problem at that stage. I think it's come around now, but so we had a job to do with right across the board. But thankfully, Pradipto Ghosh, the secretary at Ministry of Environment at the time, was listening. We managed to get the film shown to Manmohan Singh briefly, and getting a veterinary diclofenac ban in 2006 was, frankly, that has saved the extinction of several species of vulture here in India. I firmly believe that. I think that has made a massive difference. So India taking that step, Pakistan and Nepal did at the same time, Bangladesh followed later, Iran, and most recently Cambodia, where they've only just found that diclofenac has recently started being used, so we were able to address that. But then after having done that, we realized that there was still a lot of diclofenac being used. And unfortunately, you can see the size of those bottles on the top left there of veterinary diclofenac. But human diclofenac was being marketed by the drug companies, quite cynically, I believe, so that it's conveniently available for illegal veterinary use. But in 2015, we managed to get a ban of the large vials, so restricted to 3 ml vials, which is all you actually need for human use. And the hospitals didn't need these large vials. And that, although that was challenged by some of the veterinary manufacturers, the drug manufacturers, Arulagam, and in particular, helped to see through and see off that challenge, and the ban has been upheld. So really good progress, and that probably is the key step which has made a difference. So going back to those 2 key actions that we needed to implement. One I mentioned was banning diclofenac, but the other one was getting ex-situ, so captive breeding, up and running, because we were not sure that we could actually get diclofenac out of the environment quick enough, and I think that was a very valid and real concern, even though that ban came perhaps sooner than we dared hope. So using the expertise of California Condor program, of Eurasian Griffon releases, Jemima Parry-Jones, world expert in raptor breeding techniques, of the IVRI, that's been more focused on the safety testing, which I'll mention in a minute, Zoological Society of India, the University of Pretoria, a really global and international effort to try and get everything right. And you'll see that, I mean, we really got that first breeding center up and running by 2004, just when I started. But they don't breed quickly. Vultures lay 1 egg a year, and they don't lay an egg until they're 5 years old, usually. And even then, they're not always very good at breeding for the first time round. So we were really under pressure, and the BNHS team were getting a lot of criticism, actually, because you know, after 2 years or even 3, we hadn't bred anything. So we got our first fledgling, and there he is on the ledge at the bottom there. Back in 2008, we had 2 fledglings that year, and then it's quickly increased, and we're now up to almost 500 fledglings per that we've produced in the breeding program overall. And you can see it's industrial scale stuff, building these huge colony aviaries, we call them, which Jemima designed, and the birds can pair up themselves in these. You can have up to 35, 40 birds in one of these, and you can breed them, and you can see breeding numbers per year. I mean, it's leveled off actually even since that graph at about 60 per year that we're producing. And artificial incubation techniques, we can actually, although they only lay 1 egg a year naturally, if you remove the first egg and put it in an incubator, they will usually lay a second egg, and you can prompt them to lay 2. And then once your egg has hatched and is a chick, you can swap it back with the to the birds in the aviary, and then you hand rear the chicks, which those are long-billed chicks at the bottom there. And so long as they don't imprint on people, you have to be careful to avoid that. They can then be put back in the aviary when they're a few months old, and we've already now had birds in the next generation breeding from those. So so that's been really successful. And here's a quick look at where those breeding centres are. We started in Pinjore, Haryana, and that centre has probably nearly half of the total captive population of birds, and well over half of the breeding is at that centre. So that's the big focus, and it's where Vibhu is based. The other BNHS centres, which RSPB really helped to get off the ground with Darwin Initiative funding and other support, but West Bengal and Assam, and then Madhya Pradesh has been a further one which BNHS run. In addition to those, there are 4 zoos, Indian zoos, which have smaller facilities, and they are also starting to breed in 2 or 3 of them. There's also one in Nepal and another one in Pakistan. So that is the overall set of breeding centres. Yes, so I'll come back to what we do with those birds in the latest updates in a bit. So all of this obviously has been a huge effort. But it's been a process of getting different partners up and running and communicating with them. But we realised that we needed to actually get more coordination between these partners, and also to make sure that everyone really understood the full science behind why we're doing what we're doing, and to work together with more. So with all this in mind, back in 2009, 2010, we started the process of trying to form a consortium, which we came up with the name of Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, SAVE. There we are, I've got my t-shirt on today. And Jarim Ramesh, the Minister of Environment at the time, agreed to help us with a launch in Delhi back in 2011, getting this off the ground. And we were also very honoured to have probably the leading raptor expert in the world, Ian Newton, agreed to be our chairman for the first 4 years. And I won't go, I mean, there's a lot more I could tell you about SAVE, but getting this consortium up and running was really, I think, a really important step. And I mean, it was initially 11 partners came together, but we're now up to 24 partners. And this is not only India, this is 6 countries. So it's basically the range countries for the 4 critically endangered vulture species. So that's, and although they're predominantly, I mean, there's 3 or 4 BirdLife international partners there, BCN, BNHS, RSPB, and others, but there's also a consortium from Bangladesh. There's also the Nepal National Trust for Nature Conservation, and but really importantly, the government, the Forest Department of Nepal and of Bangladesh have both come forward and joined directly. And IVRI here, Indian Veterinary Research Institute, is a full member of SAVE. But that's not to say, you know, we're working very closely with obviously the state governments and others, but you can see the rest of the partners there. And we have an annual meeting, but, oh yes, just a little bit more on the partners. 4 of the partners are in a new category, more localized organizations, which are really doing top priority work that's been identified by the SAVE network as being really of the paramount importance. And we hope through their membership that they can generate more support. We have an annual meeting. This was the first meeting back in 2011. We had our usual one. It's always been in November for some reason. And it rotates between the countries, although it's more often in India and Nepal than most, but also in Bangladesh. And we were hoping to have it in Cambodia this year. We don't know whether that's going to happen. But the key of those meetings is actually updating this regional action plan. This action plan is what determines what we do. And we go through all the priority actions that are needed, and we look at them and review them each year. And that those traffic light system on the left is just a reminder that for actions which are going okay, they're green, but the ones that are red are ones that we're really worried about and we're not making enough progress on. We that feeds back, and then we review what we need to do with all those partners. But SAVE itself doesn't have any funds. It's just a consortium. So really, and I think it's functioning very well. I mentioned those 2 actions from back in 2004, breeding centres and removing diclofenac, but there's one more action which has come, well, it's really been generated through the SAVE network as something more tangible that we can do on a local scale, because both of those others are things which, you know, you cannot really make progress on at a more local or regional scale. So having what we call vulture safe zones, or provisional vulture safe zones, teams of 5, 6, 4, 5 people going around for a 100-kilometer radius area and really doing focused efforts with the state officials, the drug associations, vet colleges, farmers groups, and really getting the messages across. And this is a map of where those vulture safe zone initiatives have started off so far. Not all of them are fully functioning, but most of them are. And you'll see most of them are in India, but there are, Nepal is where this really got off the ground, and Nepal is leading the way in a lot of this in terms of getting local and community support for the actions that are needed. And I would highlight that Bangladesh has come quite, although it's come later to the whole situation, it's now at the forefront, and the vulture safe zones in Bangladesh have been formally gazetted by government, which has not happened in any of the other countries. And really, although the populations of vultures there are relatively small and remnant, but I think we can all learn some lessons on how they are operating. And there's a very nice small book that's been produced by Deepu from Bangladesh and IUCN Bangladesh office on that. So these vulture safe zones are just something which, to draw to your attention, there's also a smaller one in Pakistan. But so that's something else, and something that I think other organizations could engage more strongly with, and I hope will do in future, because there are big gaps, and we can talk more about the criteria on that. So the SAVE reports and priorities are, which are reviewed every year in open session in the meetings, and they have been largely adopted by a new, well, and I mentioned the CMS, the Convention of Migratory Species Action Plan, Multi-Species Action Plan, and really the SAVE blueprint document has been absorbed into that. But it's interesting, again, that even within Asia, we've got different priority threats in different parts of Asia. Here in South Asia, NSAIDs are still the key threat to vultures. There are some other upcoming threats. Poison baits certainly happens, particularly in northeast India, but occasionally in other places as well. Energy infrastructure is a problem, electrocution. So those are problems. But look, for South Asia, it's completely different. So poison baits and food availability are right up there as being key threats, which they're just not here in India. Okay, so and this is just to briefly make you aware of one other intergovernment initiative on vultures, which was instigated back in 2012 by the IUCN regional office, but the governments of India, Nepal, Bangladesh and Pakistan, who came together to form a regional steering committee, and that meets once a year. So that's going along in parallel, and the links with SAVE are very strong, and it's helpful to have that extra form of dialogue. Okay, so let's give some more updates. And one thing we've done just this year, which I hope will be of interest to some of you, is we've, the partners of SAVE from India have come up with a summary, a policy summary. It's an 8-page document. You can download it from that link on the SAVE website. And that gives you a lot of basic information, background information, as well as some of the key facts and the priorities, of course. And my favorite part of that is this diagram here, which has also just been repeated in a short article in Indian Birds this month. That's a summary of which NSAIDs, these cattle painkillers used by vets, and unfortunately all of that list are being used, and they're all legal except for veterinary diclofenac at the bottom there. And unfortunately, from the color code there, you can tell that there are others which are lethal to vultures. And just working up from the bottom, we've got diclofenac, ketoprofen. We know we've done safety testing on on closely related vultures which were killed by ketoprofen. Unfortunately, Aceclofenac, it is effectively diclofenac. It's just under it's called a pro-drug. It turns to diclofenac inside the cow and is still legal. Then there's nimesulide, and nimesulide, all these names probably new to most people, but nimesulide, we're certain it's toxic, although it hasn't been formally safety tested yet. But there is some provisional data from South Africa on gyps vultures, which suggests it really is lethal. And we've got dead vultures in Gujarat, 4 or 5 now. They've got gout, they've got nimesulide in their tissues, and they don't have diclofenac. Very, very suspicious that this is a further nightmare for the vulture situation, and one that needs to be banned. But we need to do the safety testing, and IVRI is planning to do that, but it's not happened yet. There are others which are toxic at slightly lower doses, or, well, we need more information on these, flunixin and carprofen. Meloxicam, I talked about at the beginning as being the one safe drug. We've done safety testing. We're absolutely confident it is safe. But one new one, and this is a great source of joy for me, I must admit, is that tolfenamic acid has been tested. The tests are effectively more or less complete. It's looking like that will be a second safe drug for the vets, because the vets really don't like vulture conservationists because we stop them using drugs that they would like to use. And so if we can recommend another one as being safe, and so look out for an announcement on that. I'm rather confident, but we can't announce it until it's been formalized and finalized. So that's good news. Aceclofenac, I just mentioned, really a big worry. It does turn to diclofenac, as I said. Those are, you get tablet form, but more importantly, you get injectable form. And the vets really like injectable forms of these drugs. And this is becoming much more popular in the last year or two. So Aceclofenac, I'm hopeful. I mean, all the drug controllers and the senior veterinarians and pharmacologists and others all tell you, oh yes, that turns to diclofenac. They know it, we've proved it experimentally, but it's not banned. And we hope that the government will take action on that one, because there is still diclofenac appearing, and it's actually not always possible to tell whether it's diclofenac or aceclofenac once you're testing it in the cow. Tolfenamic acid I've just mentioned. Okay, so what's going on with the vulture populations? I've talked a bit about India. In Nepal, where they've been doing much more regular road transect surveys, and they've also done a lot more intensive awareness work and vulture safe zone work very successfully. And this trend is now statistically significant recovery curve. So in Nepal, we have turned the corner, at least for white-rumped vulture, and in fact, even for slender-billed vulture, that's a very tiny population, so we can't put too much emphasis on that. But for the white-rumped vulture, that is a good sample size, and we've got real recovery, and it's linked to where there isn't high incidence of diclofenac. So we really feel that this endorses what we're doing and what we need to do more in India. And that, partly with that in mind, releases have been going ahead from the small breeding centre, which only has white-rumped vultures, and with tracking the birds, and releases have now happened. And the birds hadn't been going very far for the first couple of years, but we've also been tagging and tracking wild birds in the same area, which have been going much further and often going up to 90, 100 kilometers and a bit more in some cases. And we were beginning to get a little bit concerned that these birds were not going more than 6 to 8 kilometers by and large. And you can see that's the release aviary, by the way, on the top right. And we do feeding of wild birds in the same area, and then the released birds can come out and join and intermingle, and they have a few months to get used to seeing each other and get socially integrated. So it's a soft release, and we've now had 3 of those releases, and 30 birds have been released in Nepal, and that is going pretty well. But I mentioned that they hadn't been going very far, but possibly an indirect effect of lockdown. So since at the end of March, suddenly the birds have been moving a bit more, and including coming into UP and Bihar in India. So those are the tracks of some of the released birds. And yeah, it's exciting stuff. You can get more updates on that on the SAVE website and the BCN Bird Conservation Nepal websites. So Nepalese releases are going ahead, and in fact, a sign of success in Nepal will be that we will hopefully be able to actually finish the breeding program within the next 2 to 3 years in Nepal, and release all of the white-rumped vultures there. So in India, we've done releases of Himalayan griffons just as a sort of dummy run, really, both in Haryana, and now more recently in December we did one in West Bengal. And the West Bengal one was important because it had the first satellite tagged birds, and those birds are still transmitting and doing fine. We hope that there will be a release in Haryana. Of course, COVID again interfered with our plans to do the first release in Haryana in March. So we will get there. Just briefly to mention the other countries that are involved in the SAVE program. I mentioned Cambodia already, and a new partner and consortium, national consortium for Myanmar has joined in the last 2 years, and they are becoming more active. It's on a fairly small scale, but that's a very welcome addition. So I just wanted to quickly summarize the key priorities based on those SAVE meetings, and everything's about NSAIDs and withdrawing these wretched veterinary drugs which are lethal to vultures. So we're hopeful that Aceclofenac might be banned here in India soon. Ketoprofen, we're actually very optimistic will be banned in Bangladesh very soon. We've not had much progress so far here in India. Nimesulide, I said we really urgently need we need safety testing, flunixin and carprofen. Okay, and so the experimental testing of tolfenamic acid, I've mentioned that, so that's hopefully some good news on the way. Develop Vulture Safe Zone Network, I've mentioned that, and getting that up and running more widely, getting more partners involved. Monitoring drug availability, actually doing surveys of what pharmacies are selling if you've got a sick cow is a good way of finding out what's available. And the final one on this list is better monitoring of vulture mortality, so getting autopsies of dead vultures. We're not good enough at this at the moment, and getting more information. You know, we know poison baits can be a problem in some areas, and we need to start thinking more about that. But getting that protocol in place, and actually the releases themselves will help us understand that better. So are populations recovering apart from in Nepal, where they are? And interestingly, the state of India's birds recently posted this, and I've just pinched it off from Ashwin and Sahel to illustrate the trends coming through on that. And very worryingly, the population trends in the last 5 years are still on steep decreases across India. So that is extremely worrying, and that's almost all the vulture species. But white-rumped vulture shows a 17% decrease apparently from that, which is another way, which will be really important to keep an eye on that. And I'm a great eBird fan myself, and keep submitting your records. So that's interesting but sobering, and also shows declines in some of the other vulture species, even bearded vulture. And I often get asked about the feeding stations, and those can be really can be very helpful as a sensitizing and community involvement, and especially if you've got a lot of tourists that could use it. But I just wanted to raise the fact that having a feeding station for vultures does, you know, it's not going to prevent them being killed by NSAIDs. So it can be done if the messaging is right. But I do worry that it can divert resources from the real threats if you're not careful. But this is again a topic which comes up quite regularly. We've got a lot of evidence that food shortage is not a problem in most parts of India, you know, the 99% declines of vultures, we do not believe there's a 99% decline in food availability, and we do have information to back that up. So I'm going to wind up there. So thanks very much to various people whose slides I've borrowed for this, although many of them were mine. But if anybody's interested in getting email updates when we've posted news items on the SAVE website, just drop me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. So Nikhil has asked me if I would, having finished, just, do you want me to do this now, Nikhil? Just, there's a question of the day.
Yeah, sure.
Which, well, Nikhil, you go ahead. You do that, and I'll be quiet. I need a glass of water.
Hi, so one of our partners, Zayas, has very nicely given us some nice giveaways of binocular harnesses and feeding kits. So here's the question for the answer. So if you just take a screenshot of this website, you can probably answer this question, and Chris will choose the best answer and they will get the prize. We've also opened the chat right now, so if anybody has any questions for Chris, please put them in the chat. So screenshot of this if you like. And the next announcement we have is our other partner, Sanctuary Asia, is actually giving away 1 year of magazine, digital magazine of Sanctuary Asia to people who log on with webinars. So we've taken a screenshot of this too. And one more. Save your date for 12th of July. We have the Great Indian Nature Quiz planned. So Kavi, please take over for questions.
Yes, sure. So Chris, we have a few questions already coming in for you. The first one is from Shrikant from Deccan Birders, Hyderabad, who's asking that will the initiatives currently being taken up to save the vultures be able to revive numbers of these species back to the steep population decline compared to the 80s? When can we say that the population can now survive without any captive breeding programs?
Yeah, that's a really good question and an important one. I think we all know and realize that the populations are never going to be, they're never going to resume those 40 million estimate that they were back in the 1980s. And I think a 5 to 10 year run with a stable population is the short answer. You know, the generation times are slow on this, and we've been really quite pleased and pleasantly surprised that the vulture trend could be turned around in Nepal in the way it has. But that in Nepal, we've got to the point where we are contemplating closing down the breeding program. Nowhere in India do we have confidence that population trends are doing the same. And just to mention that Gujarat and the Gear Foundation do their almost annual statewide counts, and Madhya Pradesh have been doing counts. Although those, you know, it's very difficult to make them properly systematic in the way that you might want, but the Gujarat trends are still negative. They are declining each year still in Gujarat. In Madhya Pradesh, there's some indication that they might be stable, but I think we need to see a longer run of years and some more, ideally road transects actually would be very good to back that up. And yeah, I mean, I am quite excited about these, if we can use eBird trends to help monitor these things, because the road transects are a lot of work, and probably something we do need to keep repeating, but perhaps we can find other ways of gauging those, you know, whether they're stable or not.
Okay, great. I'm clubbing together a couple of questions here. People are asking specifically regarding the locations where certain breeding programs are taking place. So a few questions we have here are asking whether any breeding or conservation programs for vultures are specifically happening in the Western Ghats or even in Jorbir in Rajasthan that has a huge number of griffon vultures.
Yes. There has been quite a lot of discussion about the idea to have a breeding facility in further south. Well, I mean, Hyderabad Zoo has a small one, but I think having something further south and ideally somewhere closer to a potential release site would be great. And in fact, personally, I think that something which might be a sort of pre-release area might be a good measure. And in fact, you know, we've got, I mean, the productivity in the other centres is good now. We almost get more birds than we can release, although you know, you need to be able to satellite tag them and all the rest, takes a lot of preparation, but I think having one in the south would be very good of some sort. I'm not aware of any plans in Rajasthan, although I know it has been discussed at various points, but I'm not conversant with where that stands.
Okay. Another couple of questions, I'm clubbing them again together. One is, the first part of the question is, can all species of vultures be bred in captivity? And the second part of this is, how frequently are captive vultures released? And once released, do they coexist with the wild vulture population? Do we have any information on this?
Okay, well, these species had never been bred in captivity before, which is another reason why there were quite a few skeptics out at the beginning, although other gyps species had been. But I think if you ask Jemima Parry-Jones, she will tell you with confidence all of them could be bred in captivity, because I'm just trying to think. For red-headed vulture, there's certainly not been anything much. But yeah, I think the short answer is almost certainly yes, it's possible. And the other part of the question was, integrating with wild population.
The wild population, yeah.
Yeah, well, the Nepalese birds, we're still in early phase of that, but we have learnt from Eurasian griffon work in Bulgaria and in France, where that has worked extremely well, and actually integrating and pairing up even with wild birds is very much on the cards, and we're expecting that. But we'll be, it's all a bit new in terms of what's happening here, to answer that fully.
Okay, we have a question from Malesri, who's asking that meloxicam is generally more costly for use by local cattle owners, but it's good to know that another safe drug has been found. Do we have any survey of information on the uptake of these safe products, and have they been replacing the toxic drugs in different parts of India? So do we have any data or information on how successful the adoption of these newer, safer drugs has been?
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, meloxicam, when we first found that it was safe, was about double the price of most brands of diclofenac. But now, some brands of meloxicam are cheaper than some brands of diclofenac, and the price difference is really quite marginal. So that's great news. So, and I don't believe that the economics of meloxicam are a major barrier now. So that's great, although there are some other complications with meloxicam which have clouded the issue, I think, is that, these are all drugs which are out of patent, so they can be manufactured by anyone as generics, and they can be, lost my train of thought, but that they can be, yes, some of them have been manufactured very badly and put in very, very high alkaline solvents, so that if you inject it into a cow or a buffalo, it hurts, it really hurts. It's pH 10, believe it or not, which really, really alkaline. So, so that has put vets off using that, because it, the buffalo might kick you if you do that to it. But I mean, thankfully, most of the formulations and the vets, have come to know which ones are better and which ones are worse. And that is overcoming that with time. But it's the sort of thing that was a setback. And actually, I've spent a lot of time going round to manufacturers of pharmaceutical manufacturers with an expert, and with Vibhu Prakash, to talk to them about this and to convince them to make good meloxicam and make sure that they know about, you know, a good composition that they can use. So that's all been part of the process that we've been doing this, you know, for the best part of 10 years since we first started visiting pharmaceutical companies. Although need to do more of it. And if anybody listening has good connections with pharmaceutical company that really might want to genuinely help us, and of course you're very quickly into the realms of getting too close to companies and people then thinking that you're taking their money and you know, got ulterior motives. It's very, very, yeah, we do have to be careful, but getting more good information on drugs that are being made available is something that we need to do more on. And in fact, we've just agreed that we really need a pharmaceutical subcommittee of the SAVE, one of the SAVE committees to tackle this more directly. So if anyone listening has got some ideas on that, do get in touch, because it's a really important area that we are not doing enough, and I'm sure we need more experts to help us on that. I hope that answers.
Yep, definitely. Related to this again, a question from Rinkita is Aceclofenac still being used for veterinary treatment, or is it just the other NSAIDs which you mentioned which pose a major threat now to vultures?
We do know that diclofenac is still being used, but it's sort of fairly, some of that information is anecdotal, but it is, yeah, we know it's still being used. We know that some vets, they will go and buy a bundle of 5 3 ml vials in a little, with a rubber band around them, and then they break all 3 and all 5 and make up the amount that they need for their cow. So we know that some vets do that. Some vets just love, I mean, diclofenac is a bit of a wonder drug, unfortunately for the vultures. It is quick acting, and the properties in all these NSAIDs are slightly different from one another. And you know, I'm not an expert in these things, but I've ended up learning more than I thought I would on this. So yes, it is being used, but we think that Aceclofenac is a nasty upcoming drug that's taking over from diclofenac, because it's such a convenient, and again, it's cynical by the drug companies to market it, because they know what it is and what it's doing.
Yep, definitely. And I think in like a follow-up question to that, quite related to this, is again that when you got diclofenac banned, right, did you face any friction while working with the different governments and even the pharma companies in trying to get those drugs banned?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We were expecting a big backlash at the time and strong resistance, but the science was strong enough that the companies didn't resist. And you know, looking back on it, maybe they already saw the loophole of making multi-dose vials of human diclofenac, and they could get away with that. I don't know whether that was why they didn't resist it more strongly. Having said that, I had a conversation with a drug controller in Pakistan who told me that his life in Pakistan had been made really bad, because he'd had to, a lot of the companies in Pakistan had really challenged it, and very strongly, which didn't happen here in India. So yes, it's not always predictable, but yeah, and which actually reminds me of something else, which just to drop in for everyone, is that there's a new proposal to ban carbofuran among 27 pesticides, which is one of the main compounds that's used for the poison baits problem. and we're just we're hoping that that will go through, but we've been told informally that the drug companies will be resisting that. So if any experts or people who know more about that, again, we'd like to hear from you, but we've just written our letters of support for that one. A different issue, but it also has a knock-on effect for vultures.
Great. We'll just take the last couple of questions now. This question is from Kamlesh, who's asking, what is the survival rate of vultures in the wild? Is there any difference in the survival rates of wild populations and captive bred populations?
The short answer is we don't have enough data or monitoring data to answer that comprehensively. Yeah, I mean, I think generally birds do live or can live longer in captivity than they do in the wild, but we know that these birds live for 30 to 40 years, even in the wild. But, well, I'm extrapolating from other congeneric species, but so my expectation is it won't be that very different, but it will be slightly longer in captivity.
Great. But a few people are asking about if you could suggest any books or resources that they can refer to learn more about vultures, the threats they're facing, and what people can do to help save them.
I mean, if they haven't looked at the SAVE website, do look at that. I would say that, wouldn't I? I mean, in terms of books on vultures, I mean, I've got, yeah, Rishad Naroji's book here. It's got some nice summaries. I mean, there isn't another reference book which really gives a lot more detail. One thing I should have mentioned, though, is the multi-species action plan, which I referred to. That actually has got more up-to-date information on the vultures for all of the old world than any other reference. So you can get that again through it's linked on the SAVE website. It's 120 pages, so it's a big thing, but it's available online. You can download it free. So so that would be a good resource to use and also to refer to, as well as the SAVE blueprint. But yeah, I think those would be my first suggestions anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I think I'll hand it over to Nick now.
Great. Nice questions.
Thanks, Chris. That was very informative. Thank you for the journey to the vultures. I'm sure we all enjoyed it. And thanks again. So see you all tomorrow. We have Dr. Prachi Mehta. The same link as today. So she's doing a wonderful talk on owls.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.